The rain had been falling for hours, heavy and unrelenting, as if the sky itself was grieving. Outside the memorial hall in Beijing, thousands of fans stood shoulder to shoulder, umbrellas trembling under the storm. The air was thick with sorrow, with silence broken only by the muffled sobs of young voices holding candles and photos of Yu Menglong. His sudden passing had sent shockwaves through the entire industry, but the sight of two familiar figures arriving hand in hand pierced hearts even deeper. Wang Yibo and Xiao Zhan stepped out of the black car, both dressed in somber black suits, their faces pale and hollow. Cameras flashed from every angle, but neither flinched. They weren't here for publicity, nor for the media frenzy that had camped outside all night. They were here because they had lost a brother, a friend, a piece of their shared journey. The fans gasped softly when they saw Xiao Zhan's eyes red-rimmed, his hand subtly tightening around Yibo's as though afraid he might crumble without the anchor. Inside the hall, the fragrance of white chrysanthemums lingered in the air. A giant portrait of Yu Menglong stood at the center, his gentle smile captured forever in a photograph. Beneath it, candles flickered weakly, as though bowing under the weight of grief. Yibo walked forward first, each step heavy, his jaw clenched to keep his emotions contained. He knelt and placed a single lily at the altar, his fingers trembling. Xiao Zhan followed, his hand brushing against the frame as though he could feel the warmth of Menglong's presence still radiating from it. When he whispered, "Gu, why so soon?" his voice cracked, audible enough for the silence in the hall to amplify his pain. Fans behind the velvet ropes began crying louder, some collapsing against one another. They had adored Menglong for his warmth, his humility, the way his songs healed them. To see their idols breaking before them was both heartbreaking and strangely comforting. Their grief was shared, woven together like threads in the same cloth. Yibo turned, his usually stoic mask shattering. His eyes glistened as he glanced at Xiao Zhan, then at the fans. For a moment, he opened his mouth but no words came out. Finally, with a strained voice, he managed, "He loved you all so much. He said you gave him strength when he had none. Please, remember him that way." The simplicity of his words carried more weight than the longest eulogy. The storm outside intensified, thunder rumbling as if the heavens themselves were unwilling to let Menglong go. Xiao Zhan stepped forward, pulling Yibo closer as though needing his presence to hold himself steady. He reached for the microphone near the altar, his hand shaking, his voice raw. "Menglong wasn't just a friend," he said, scanning the sea of grieving faces. "He was family. He was someone who could light up the darkest room with a single laugh. And now that light is gone, but maybe it still burns in us. If we carry it, if we remember him, then he isn't truly gone." The fans sobbed harder, some whispering Menglong's name like a prayer. Yibo looked down, his fingers tightly interlaced with Xiao Zhan's. He couldn't stop the images flashing in his mind. Long nights of rehearsals, silly jokes on set, the way Menglong always checked if they had eaten, his quiet encouragement before big performances. The memories cut deep, like shards of glass pressing against his chest. Suddenly, a fan's trembling voice rang out from the crowd, "Sing for him," the words echoed, fragile yet determined. At first, the hall remained silent, but then others began to chant softly, "Sing, sing, sing." It was not a demand, but a plea, one last gift to Menglong, one last farewell. Xiao Zhan's lips trembled, his eyes darting to Yibo's. For a long second, the younger man said nothing, but then Yibo gave the faintest nod, his throat tightening. Slowly, they stepped toward the microphones, the hall falling into an almost holy silence. When Xiao Zhan began to sing, his voice cracked, low and trembling, but each note carried an ocean of grief. Yibo joined him, his deep, steady tone grounding the fragile melody. Together, they sang one of Menglong's most cherished songs, the one he used to hum absent-mindedly on set. The fans joined in, their voices merging with theirs, turning the hall into a cathedral of sorrow and love. Tears streamed down faces, dripping onto flowers and candles, but no one stopped singing. The moment was transcendent, more than a memorial, more than a performance. It was a communion, an unspoken vow that Menglong's memory would never fade. Even the storm outside seemed to soften, the thunder subsiding as though nature itself bowed to the chorus of grief and devotion. As the last note faded into silence, Xiao Zhan broke. He collapsed against Yibo's shoulder, sobbing openly, his body shaking with the weight of loss. Yibo held him tightly, burying his face in Xiao Zhan's hair, his own tears finally falling. Cameras clicked furiously, but even the press lowered their heads, humbled by the rawness of the scene. Hours later, as the crowd slowly dispersed, Yibo and Xiao Zhan remained by the altar, long after everyone else had gone. Their fingers still interlocked, they whispered stories to Menglong's portrait, little things only he would understand. "Remember when you made us hot pot and burned the soup?" Yibo said softly, a broken smile tugging at his lips. Xiao Zhan laughed through his tears. "Or when you sang off-key on purpose just to make me laugh before that big shoot." Their voices were hoarse, but in their laughter was love, and in their love was mourning. Before leaving, Xiao Zhan pressed his forehead gently against the glass frame of Menglong's portrait. "Rest easy, Ge. We'll keep going for you." Yibo laid his hand over Xiao Zhan's, their shared vow echoing in the empty hall. Outside, the fans lingered with candles still glowing, their reflections shimmering in puddles along the street. The world had lost Yu Menglong, but in that moment, through song, tears, and the unbreakable bond of love, his spirit was alive, etched into every heart that had gathered, into every trembling note that filled the storm. And as Yibo and Xiao Zhan walked away hand in hand into the rain, the fans followed behind them in silence, the city cloaked in grief yet carrying a fragile spark of unity. For Yu Menglong was gone, but not forgotten. His name, his warmth, his light, now lived on in all of them. The rain had eased to a mist by the time WangYibo and Xiao Zhan finally stepped out of the memorial hall. Their suits clung damply to their skin, shoes darkened with water, but they hardly noticed. The world outside felt muted, muffled, as though grief itself had silenced the city. Fans, still holding candles and flowers, parted silently to let them through. For a moment, the two men paused under the dim glow of a streetlight, their hands still entwined, both reluctant to let go. Xiao Zhan's eyes drifted upward, catching sight of the clouds that had just begun to break. A single star flickered faintly through the gray, and his chest tightened. "Menglong loved stargazing," he whispered, his voice hoarse, as if afraid to disturb the fragile stillness. "Do you remember? On that night in Hangzhou when we were exhausted after filming, he dragged us up to the rooftop just to watch the sky." Yibo nodded, his lips pressed thin. The memory washed over him vividly, Menglong laughing with a childish joy, pointing out constellations with the same seriousness he gave to music. That night, he had insisted the three of them make a pact. No matter where we are, if we see the same stars, we'll never feel alone. The thought of that moment made Yibo's chest ache, and for the first time, his tears fell silently, cutting paths down his pale cheeks. As they walked slowly toward the car, fans followed quietly at a respectful distance, some humming the song that had been sung inside. The melody floated in the night air like a prayer. Xiao Zhan suddenly stopped, turning to face them. His voice shook, but he managed to say, "Thank you for being here with us. Menglong would have been so grateful." The fans bowed their heads, holding their candles higher, their faces illuminated in the glow. For a moment, it looked like a sea of stars had descended to earth, every flicker a soul grieving, remembering. Inside the car, silence stretched long. Xiao Zhan leaned against the window, his reflection blurred by raindrops, while Yibo sat rigid, staring at his hands as if they carried weight too heavy to bear. After a long pause, Xiao Zhan spoke. "I keep hearing his laugh," he said softly. "It's like he's still around the corner, waiting to jump out and tease us." His voice broke, his fingers curling tightly against his thigh. "I can't accept it, Yibo. I can't accept that we'll never hear it again." Yibo's throat constricted. He didn't know how to comfort, how to fill the hollow that had been ripped open inside them both. Instead, he reached across and placed his hand firmly over Xiao Zhan's, anchoring him. "We'll carry him," he murmured. "Everywhere. In everything. He's not gone, not as long as we remember." His words trembled, but his conviction was steady, and Xiao Zhan clung to that, nodding slowly as tears spilled freely. Later that night, unable to sleep, they returned to Xiao Zhan's apartment. The quiet inside was suffocating, so they found themselves pulling out old photos and videos from their phones. In one clip, Menglong had draped himself over Yibo's shoulders, demanding he smile for the camera, while Xiao Zhan laughed so hard he nearly dropped his drink. Another showed the three of them singing badly at karaoke, voices cracking but joy filling every note. Watching those clips was torture and salvation all at once. Xiao Zhan buried his face in Yibo's shoulder, shaking with sobs. "He should be here," he whispered over and over. He should be here. Yibo wrapped his arms around him tightly, holding him as if the world would crumble otherwise. His own tears dampened Xiao Zhan's hair, but he didn't let go. As dawn approached, the city outside slowly stirred awake, but inside, they sat together on the couch surrounded by memories. On the table lay 3 glasses, one untouched, filled with tea. Xiao Zhan had placed it there instinctively, as though Menglong might still walk through the door. Yibo didn't move it. He didn't dare. A few days later, at the public vigil organized by fans, the atmosphere was even more overwhelming. The square was covered in white flowers, candles arranged in the shape of a heart with Menglong's name glowing in the center. Thousands sang his songs together, their voices echoing across the night. When Yibo and Xiao Zhan arrived, the crowd erupted, not in cheers, but in tears. The 2 men climbed the small stage erected near the memorial. Xiao Zhan gripped the microphone tightly, his knuckles white, while Yibo stood close behind him, silently lending strength. Menglong once told me, Xiao Zhan said, his voice trembling but firm, that music was his way of keeping his heart alive. Tonight, let's give him that heart one more time. And then they sang again, not just one song, but many. Every chorus was carried by the fans, every lyric wrapped in tears. Yibo's voice cracked midway, his usually flawless control shattered by raw grief. Xiao Zhan reached for his hand mid-song, and together they steadied each other, letting their pain pour into the music. Fans held up glowing phones, their lights swaying like stars, fulfilling Menglong's rooftop wish. By the end, the entire square was drenched in emotion. People knelt, prayed, whispered his name. Xiao Zhan and Yibo, exhausted, stood in silence, their arms around each other, staring at the glowing heart of candles. It looked like Menglong's spirit burned within it, alive and eternal. That night, back at home, Yibo finally whispered the words he hadn't been able to say out loud, "I'm scared." Xiao Zhan turned to him, startled. "Of what?" he asked softly. Yibo's eyes glistened in the dim light. "That one day I'll forget the sound of his laugh. That his face will fade from my mind." Xiao Zhan shook his head fiercely, clutching Yibo's hand. "No. We won't let that happen. We'll keep telling his stories, keep singing his songs. We'll keep him alive in us. That's how family works, Yibo. We don't forget. Ever." His conviction was unshakable, his grip strong. And in that moment, Yibo believed him. The loss of Yu Menglong carved a scar across their hearts, but it also bound them tighter to each other and to the fans who shared their grief. Together, they mourned, remembered, and carried him forward. For in every tear shed, in every song sung, in every star shining above, Menglong's spirit lived on, eternal and unforgotten.